All that German. Well, I can see the sense of some of those objections, and that's why I'm going to begin my discussion of this relentlessly serious opera by quoting a few lines from The Importance of Being, if not serious, at least earnest. Oscar Wilde will surely have the right words, if anyone has them, to defend Elektra from would-be objectors. So, Act 2, Scene 1. You'll remember the setting. It's summer in an old English country garden. Under a spreading yew tree, the bespectacled Miss Prism, a matron of ample years, is discovered, with her books. To the back, sprinkling the flowers, is the very essence of prettiness, the delicious and deliciously empty-headed Cecily. "Cecily," calls Miss Prism, "intellectual pleasures await you. Your German grammar is on the table. Pray open it at page 15. Cecily moves slowly stage front. "But I don't like German," she says. "It isn't at all a becoming language. I know perfectly well that I look quite plain after my German lesson." "Child," Miss Prism insists, "your guardian laid particular stress on your German as he was leaving for town yesterday. Indeed, he always lays stress on your German when he is leaving for town." Now, do you suppose Mr. Wilde is right, that there's nothing like a good dose of German to keep a nice girl from looking too pretty? In any case, we soon learn that once, in her earlier days, Miss Prism wrote a work of fiction. "Oh, how wonderfully clever you are," Cecily exclaims. And she adds, "I hope it did not end happily. I don't like things that end happily. They depress me so much." Miss Prism answers plainly, "The good ended happily and the bad unhappily. That is what fiction means." "I suppose so," says Cecily, "but it seems very unfair." Now, is all that Mr. Wilde's comment on today's opera? Well, he had himself just written, in one frenzied night in Paris, a fiction of ambivalent good and evil called Salome. But he couldn't have known that a composer named Richard Strauss was going to turn Salome into a German opera, and then go on to write today's even more ambivalent, Germanic, and unpretty Elektra. No, what Mr. Wilde knew, and said prismatically through his comic characters, was that good and evil and their consequences are indeed what fiction means, but that our conventional notions about good and evil, fiction ought, for sanity's sake, to challenge. All comedy is largely a matter of perspective, and the delicately loony characters in The Importance of Being Earnest provide such perspectives. Miss Prism, indeed. Her remarks refract the light. Cecily, indeed. Cecilia was the virgin dedicated to music and tragically martyred. And so, with those oblique reminders that shifting lights of good and evil glance through works of art, we can turn to the great, ferocious, morally ambivalent work of art that is Elektra. And German though it is, let's start with its Greek antecedents. The story is fiction with at least a slight basis in fact. More than 10 centuries before Christ, Mycenae was the most powerful city in the world, and its king, Agamemnon, was set to lead the Greek forces, 1,000 ships, in a punitive expedition against the city of Troy. He thought his cause was just. But before he could sail, the winds blew against him, and he was told by a portent from heaven that he would never sail till he sacrificed his eldest daughter. Suddenly, It was as if he had no power at all. What was wrong and what was right? He made his decision. To get the favoring wind for his thousands of men, he ritually slew that one beloved Iphigenia. And then, during his long absence at the Trojan War, his wife Clytemnestra determined to punish him. She took his sworn enemy Aegisthus as her lover. And when Agamemnon returned victorious to his city, the two together slew him. Clytemnestra thought her cause was just. It was blood for blood. Aegisthus, too, thought he was acting rightly. Agamemnon's father had done terrible things to his father. So Agamemnon fell himself under the axe, naked in his bath, defenseless as ever his daughter had been. And then Clytemnestra and Aegisthus found that they had to rule Mycenae with a reign of terror. And the mother, who thought she had rightly avenged the one child, turned on her other children. She cruelly sent her young son Orestes away, lest he grow up to avenge his father. And her precocious daughter Electra she kept in virtual poverty in the palace. All her prettiness turned ugly, within and without. As the years passed, and the two separated children grew to maturity, the situation built inevitably towards another act of violence. That is where today's opera begins. Today's part of the story was told often in classic Greece, during a Holy Week in March, in the stone theater on the south slope of the Acropolis in Athens. And over the years it was told by three of the greatest dramatists known to man, Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. Each of them told the story differently because, for each of them, it meant something different. Aeschylus made it into a trilogy as vast as Wagner's Ring. In fact, Wagner read Aeschylus' work continually while composing the Ring, exclaiming over its power. For Aeschylus, the central character in the story is the son, Orestes, and the trilogy is called, for the son, the Oresteia. Grown to manhood, Orestes returns to his rightful kingdom, recognizes his sister Electra among the serving women, joins her in a long vengeance duet. A good 2/3 of a Greek tragedy was sung. And then, steeled for vengeance, Orestes kills his mother and her lover. Orestes thinks he is acting justly, but he cracks under the strain. Pursued by the spirits that avenge blood spilt in the family, he runs for sanctuary to the god who ordered him to act as he did, the rational Apollo. But eventually, it is a goddess, the intuitive Athena, who saves him, restores his sanity, and brings out of all the evil eventual good. In Aeschylus, God, or the gods, teach man what true justice is. In the same theater, on the slope beneath the Parthenon, Sophocles too told the story. He made the daughter the central character and named his play Elektra for her. Electra was once a beautiful girl, made for love and tenderness. But the murder of her father and the long years of waiting for her brother have turned her savage. Sophocles is famous for his irony, and he makes us weep that, ironically, this fate should befall, of all people, this affectionate, sensitive young girl. To increase the irony, he adds a new character, the gentle sister Chrysothemis, to show what Electra might have been and now can never be. So in Sophocles, When Orestes returns and recognizes his sister and kills his mother to avenge his father, it is not he, but Electra who cracks under the strain. And there Sophocles ends. God or the gods do nothing. You may say, this is a story too terrible to believe. That is what our third Greek dramatist, Euripides, seems to say. He also calls his play Electra, but he twists the old story almost out of recognition. He shifts the sympathy away from the son and the daughter, and above all, condemns the gods who allow such things to happen, and perhaps condemns too the playwrights who use the squalid old myth to justify belief in their incomprehensible gods. In their three separate ways, the three Athenians address the great question of existence. I would say that there are three possible ways to answer the question, what does life mean? We can speak of God, or fate, or chance. That is to say, our lives are directed either by a providential power that knows and hears and understands and helps, or by a blind power that knows and hears nothing and is inexorable, irreversible, or, and this can be truly terrifying, by nothing, nothing at all. Which is true? Aeschylus comes down heavily on the side of God. The idea of God slowly emerges in the Oresteia like light from darkness. Gradually, we see God's saving plan. Sophocles opts rather for fate. Things happen inexorably. God, if he exists, can only warn. Man is the measure of life. Euripides changes his mind in play after play. If God exists, then he or she is evil. Or, God is only a projection of our own fears and desires. Or, there is no God. Nothing has any meaning. All is chance. Now we move ahead 24 centuries, and from Athens to Vienna. The same terrifying questions are still being raised, but in new ways, not in theatrical rituals on religious holy days, but in the dreams of patients analyzed on the couches of Dr. Freud. And Dr. Freud was tracing the old Greek fictions not to some distant time or place where they may or may not have happened, but to that timeless, newly discovered place, the human subconscious, where, he said, they continue to play themselves out furiously. Suddenly, with Freud, the old myths were profoundly true, and the time was ripe for a new Electra. Perhaps because it was Sophocles who intimated long before that the myths really happened inside all of us in dreams, it was to Sophocles of the three Greeks that the finest young poet in Vienna, Hugo von Hofmannsthal, turned for his new and neurotic treatment of the story. And perhaps because it was Wagner who insisted years before Freud that art could make the unconscious conscious, it was Wagner's musical successor, Richard Strauss, who set the new German Elektra to music. And what wonderful German it is! Can any language be so ferocious? Da fauchte sie wie eine Katze uns an. Can any language be so tender? O lass deine Augen mich sehen. And what wonderful music it is! The music of Freudian dreams. The dead Agamemnon stalks the score from the opening measure. This Agamemnon is a trauma. With a crown of blood and staring eyes, he rises upward through 4 musical octaves, crying to his daughter. Elektra is haunted by him, an emblem of the traumatized 20th century psyche. Ironically, this wounded, hate-filled girl was made for love and tenderness. In fact, when her brother comes home and the tension lets up, and she thinks for a moment she won't have to hate anymore, we can hear what she might have been. Her brother to her is an infant in his cradle. But it is too late. When her brother leaves to kill her mother, she cries through the shadows, "There are no gods." At the moment of the murder, she calls out inhumanly, "Strike again." All these scenes are lit by torches. The figures are figures from a nightmarish dream. A Freudian dream, in which, in the end, a distorted Viennese waltz wrestles with an ancient Greek choriambic rhythm. And what does this fiction mean? I am not Miss Prism, and I must say frankly, I do not know. I do not know if the good ended happily and the bad unhappily, or even what is good and what is evil in this story. But if I've felt my way into the work at all, I have felt with Sophocles and Wagner and their successors Hofmannsthal and Strauss that all of this, however repellent, corresponds to something deep in me, and that facing it, I have been made pure. Something destructive in me has been swept away in, the famous old Greek word is catharsis, a great wash of pity and fear. So how wise, without knowing it, was little Cecily? It would indeed depress me if this fiction ended happily. Strangely, because it ends tragically, it leaves me feeling not depressed, but exalted. That has always been the effect of great tragedy in the theater. Something of the power of God, or fate, or chance, touches us profoundly at a depth deeper than consciousness. We leave any of the ELEKTRA plays raised to an awareness, however undefined, of the mystery of what it is to be human. And that, in the end, is what fiction means.
Thank you, Father M. Owen Leach.